Last Sunday morning, we talked about the call to discipleship. Jesus calling his disciples. One of the sweetest sounds you'll ever hear in your life is the call of God upon your life to serve in some capacity and faithfulness. Today, we're going to talk about God speaking and you and I listening, how well we do that. As disciples, that is a crucial matter. A man became deaf, so his family substituted writing messages to him for speaking. But upon visiting his doctor in a minor surgical procedure, he regained his hearing again. Then he went for a follow-up checkup with the doctor, who said, "Well, how is it going? I bet your family is delighted to know that they can talk to you again." He said, "I haven't told them. I just listened to what they say about me. And I've changed my will 3 times. I'm tempted to ask all of those who consider themselves excellent listeners to raise your hand. But I won't because I can't see your hands from here. But think about it just the same. Listening to what God has to say is central to our faith. It sometimes begins by learning to listen to each other. If God never said anything in the past, there would be no Bible. If no one ever listened to God, there would be no church of people responding, depending upon the God who is still speaking and upon people who are still listening. Jesus recognized our problem with listening when he once quoted the prophet Isaiah, saying that people in relationship to God often, quote, listen but do not understand, unquote. They look at life but don't really see what's going on at a deeper level. They act like they're hard of hearing when it comes to hearing God calling them to do something or to say something important. And they often do not listen deeply enough to allow God's call to find its way from their head to their heart, where it really can bring change and healing and transformation. There are few things more frustrating than to talk to somebody who is not really listening, and you kind of have that idea by watching their responses. That is one reason why we know that God must be very patient and long-suffering toward us, because we know we do not always listen. Now, listening with understanding to what others are saying is not one of humanity's strong traits. That's why we teach children at an early age not to interrupt, but to listen first. The self-control for containing oneself and not interrupting must be learned, and some adults, not you and me, of course, don't always achieve that self-control. Many folks like to talk more than they like to listen. We hear the noise of the words of others, but often miss or misunderstand their content, sometimes due to the habit of what I call half-listening. There's a funny story about 2 ladies reading magazines at a salon one day. One said to the other, "Did you know that it takes 7 Angora goats to make just one of these beautiful sweaters? You see it right here. It says it right here." The other woman, looking up from her magazine, replied, "It's really wonderful what they can teach animals to do these days." An example of half listening and half thinking, I would add. Another listening problem occurs when we think we understand what we have heard, but we do not. Like Mr. and Mrs. Hindeman of Toledo, who tell the humorous story of making their way out of a crowded theater. And Mrs. Hindeman had an eye condition requiring drops in her eyes every 4 hours. Well, the movie was over, and so were the 4 hours. So she decided to make her way to the restroom to put drops in her eyes. But when they arrived in the lobby, there was such a long line at the restroom, and Mrs. Hindeman blurted out for all to hear, oh dear, I can't get to the restroom, so I'll have to do it right here. The results? Suddenly there was a lot of extra room of people standing around the hindemans. What was said and what was understood by others were two very different things. Listening and thinking that you understand when you don't, and then responding all wrong are common issues of our days and times. There's a lot of selective publicity and confusing rhetoric that do not help us either. Listening is of huge importance if you take seriously what Old Testament prophet Micah had to say. Some 700 plus years before Jesus, the prophet Micah rose up among his people in the region called Judah. That was the southern kingdom at that time. He declared their national problems to be the fruit of not listening to God. For centuries they had been rescued and given guidance by God. They had been given their national identity by a call from God. And they repeatedly had not listened after that. The consequence of not listening had now resulted in a threat to their very existence at the hands of an approaching aggressor. Their social, political, moral, and spiritual lives were far from what God would have them be because they had not listened for a long time. And now their society was ripe for a takeover by an unscrupulous foreign power. Again, in the Gospel of Mark, what God would have us know about Jesus is right there in a few words expressed to three of his disciples. It came as a revelation from heaven. "This is my Son," came the voice of God, "the beloved one. Listen to him." That was the message. It is still the message for any church or faithful follower of Jesus to keep front and center. Know Jesus, listen to him. Turn to him regularly like you would to a best friend and listen to what he has to say about your life and mine and to our times and to our places, with all of the implications that his words have for our relationships, our friendships, our families, our nation, and our world. Listen to him. Really listen, and be sure you understand what you're hearing. God speaks through Jesus, but we must listen and understand before we can respond with faith and faithfully. Some of the same problems we have in listening to others, we also have with God. Impaired listening has many causes, but three are perhaps enough for today. Number one is being judgmental. Number two is our personal agendas distracting us. And three is our fear of creating conflict or being in it. First, being judgmental. We don't listen well to people that we judge are wrong, or people we don't like, or people whose interests are not ours. Rather than listen well to understand them, we spend energy working up arguments against their ideas, or we put them aside altogether. Applied to listening to Jesus and knowing what you know of what he teaches and what he claims, how far do you go in putting his way of life into daily practice, sharing your knowledge of it enthusiastically with others, and risking your reputation by standing firm in his teachings in the midst of some of the critical issues of our day? And there are plenty of those that we all know. As a listener to Jesus, which one of his teachings in the Bible are your favorites and draw you close to him? But also, which ones do you avoid because you judge them as being too difficult, or perhaps you don't even think they are correct? Choosing what we like, rejecting the rest. A second impairment to listening can be the force of our own agendas, taking all of our attention. We like the way we think about things, the plans we have, the way we do things, and including our lifestyles. And we don't want to change them, even when it would be a faithful thing to do as a disciple. We tend not to listen well when we have made our plans for the day, and then someone interrupts us with an unexpected comment or a need. We walk right past people without knowing it, miss knowing their needs, largely because it takes time to really listen to someone, and our personal agendas are already filled and no time to listen. In walking past people, following the beeline of our agenda, we can miss our hunger, we can miss their loneliness, their challenges, their disappointments, their heartaches, their frustrations, their joys, their losses, and their interests. We never really get to know them as well as we could if we listened and understood. It's no different with Jesus. We miss a lot of our relationship with him and what we could learn if we find little or no time in our agendas to listen to him in quiet places of our heart and of our mind. A third impairment to our listening is the fear of conflict. We don't like conflict. We don't like to be in it ourselves. We do not listen well to people we strongly oppose or disagree with. Our feelings and opinions flood our minds and dull our hearing. Our concentration falls apart and we miss understanding another person's point of view. When we disagree with someone, we tend to hear only what we want to hear and put aside the rest. Applied to listening to Jesus, we must beware of doing the same thing. When push comes to shove, many things that Jesus taught are regularly compromised in the market day, or place rather, of life and in relationships. And the standards of Jesus' teachings are regularly overlooked and not applied. Listening to Jesus and being his friend and disciple, which is what we mean when we come to the Lord's table. We want to be counted among them. But what it means is let's taking time to listen by reading, studying, sharing our faith and our insights with others, meditating upon Jesus' recorded thought in the Bible, and engaging in a prayerful and daily relationship with him. As in any relationship, real listening requires work, effort, and a devoted time. It's true for friends who take the time to do it for friends, for spouses and partners who really listen to each other, really listen. Busy parents who take time to really listen carefully to their children, and children who learn to really listen carefully to their parents. And all of us, as we hear God still speaking, and speaking through his beloved Son Jesus, and saying quite clearly, listen to him. God bless our listening.